Hello and welcome to my guide for painting the dreaded Ambul for Blackstone Fortress. As you can see, the first thing I've done is sprayed him with Mechanica Standard Grey spray from Games Workshop. Then I'm going to use some Arkellian Green contrast paint to paint all the areas that will be a deep blue. Once that contrast paint has dried, I'm going to add a wash of Nuln oil. I'm going to do a couple more washes later on because I want the armour to be a little bit darker than the rest of his body. So while that dried, I'll start on his little gribblies. I'm going to use some Cygor brown contrast paint to paint the armour plating for them. And once that had dried, I then dry brushed them with some Dryad bark, followed by some Gothor brown. Next I used some Morghast bone to paint the soft fleshy underbelly, which I then washed with some Army Painter soft tone. And while that wash dries, I'm going to add another layer of Nuln oil to the Ambul. Just the armour though, specifically. And then I'll relayer the Morghast bone on the little gribbly, which we followed from a 50-50 mix of Morghast bone and Wraith bone. Then I'll add the final Nuln oil wash on the Ambul. Then my camera will completely lose focus while I paint some Abaddon black on the mandibles, the legs, and the faces of the little gribblies, which will then receive a wash with some Nuln oil. For the Ambul, I'm going to use some Temple Guard blue to start painting the soft fleshy parts that are close to the armour. That includes the hands, the knees, and the face. These areas will then receive a wash with some Drakenhof Nightshade. Then I'm going to use some Temple Guard blue to very carefully edge highlight parts of the armour. I'll continue to use the Temple Guard blue to brighten up the areas of the skin. And this will be followed by a 50-50 mix of Temple Guard blue and Barahoth blue. This will be followed by Barahoth blue just by itself for the next highlight. For the areas of his skin that I haven't painted yet, I'm going to use Fenrisian Grey. And I'm going to wash that with some Nuln oil that's been watered down a little bit with some Lamia Medium. I'm then going to use Volupus Pink to paint his claws and his hooves. And all of the little holes on his armour I'm going to paint with matte white. And I'll give him a wash with Fugen Orange. While those washes dry, I'm going to do a 50-50 mix of Venetian Grey and matte white for the first set of highlights on his skin. And this will be followed by the same mix, but at a 30-70 ratio instead. I'm then going to give those orange spots a second coat of Fugen Orange. Once that wash is dried, we're going to go back to these spots and do a 50-50 mix of Fire Dragon Bright and matte white for the first highlight, followed by the same mix but at a 30-70 ratio. For his claws and hooves, I'm going to do a 50-50 mix of Screamer Pink and Pink Horror for the first highlight, followed by Thin Down Pink Horror for the second. I'll use Mephiston Red to paint his eyes, and Pink Horror to paint the little stringy things that are coming from his face, as well as the tongues on the tiny little gribblies. And I'll give those a quick wash with some Carroburg Crimson, except I'll just do the very tip or the base of the tongues. His mandibles will be painted with Morghast bone, and all those maggots on all of the bases will be painted with some Wraith bone. The mandibles will be washed with some Army Painter soft tone, while the maggots will be washed with some Agrax Earthshade. After the washes have dried, I'm going to move back to the eyes on the Ambul, and I'm going to use Evil Sun Scarlet to start the highlighting process. And this will be followed by Wild Rider Red, just as another highlight to make the eyes stand out a little bit more. Next, I'll do a 50-50 mix of Pink Horror and matte white just to highlight the little tongue areas. And then I'm going to relayer the Morghast bone just to brighten things up a little bit, avoiding all of the recesses. For the first highlight, it'll be a 50-50 mix of Morghast bone and Wraith bone, followed by Wraithbone just by itself for the final highlight. For the little maggot things, we're going to do a quick dry brush over them with Wraithbone. And then we'll paint all of their heads and mandibles with some Abaddon Black. Finally, all that's left are the wings on the little tiny Gribblies, so I'm going to use some grey cere to paint those. Followed by a 50-50 mix of grey cere and matte white. And then for the final highlight, matte white just by itself. And once you've based them however you want to base them, that's those guys done. I have to say, this is probably one of my favourite Games Workshop models I've ever painted. He's really unique, and he was such a joy to paint, and he was fairly easy to do as well. I think the only shame about him is he doesn't get much use outside of Blackstone Fortress. He didn't take too long to paint either, only rocking in around about 4 hours for the pair. And to be honest, a lot of the time is just waiting for those first few washes to dry. Again, I had an absolute blast painting him, and I really did enjoy the process. And if you watched this video and you found it useful, thank you so much for watching them. I really do hope it helped. And if you want to see more, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you on the next video. Thank you once again, and goodbye for now.